The phone rang twice before she picked it up. It was sometime in the spring of 1970, and Janis Joplin was in her Los Angeles apartment when Kris Kristofferson called to tell her about a song. Not to ask her to record it, not exactly. More to describe it, to put it in front of her the way you put something in front of someone when you know, with a certainty that doesn't require confirmation, that it belongs to them and not to you. He had written it. It had already been recorded by Roger Miller, who had done something good with it. But Kristofferson had been carrying a feeling, growing stronger by the month, that the song had not yet arrived at its destination. He told her it was called Me and Bobby McGee. Janis said she knew it. She had heard Roger Miller's version. She told Kristofferson it was a good song. She said this the way you say. Something is good when you mean it as a conclusion rather than an opening, good, finished, no further action required. Kristofferson pushed gently. He told her what he thought the song could do in her hands. He used specific language, the language of someone who understood both the song and the voice he was describing it to. He said there was something in the song that her voice could reach that no other voice he knew of could reach. The line at the center of it, the one about freedom, needed something she had that he couldn't quite name but could identify the moment he heard her sing. Janis was quiet for a moment. Then she said she didn't think so. She said it without bitterness, without false modesty. She simply didn't think she was the right person for it. Roger Miller had already given it a life. The song existed. What would she add? She had enough material for Pearl. She didn't need to reach for someone else's work when there was plenty of her own. Kristofferson thanked her for listening. They talked for a few more minutes about nothing in particular. She said goodbye, she hung up, and then she sat in her apartment in Los Angeles in the spring of 1970, and the song she had just said no to began to do something it had no permission to do. It began to play in her head. Not Roger Miller's version, a version that didn't exist yet. A version in her own voice, finding the line about freedom from a place that no one had yet found, because no one who had yet sung the song had lived inside that line the way she had. She didn't call Kristofferson back that night, but the song had found her. And songs, once they find you, are not easily refused. To understand why Janis Joplin said no to Me and Bobby McGee before she said yes, to understand what made her hesitate, what made the hesitation feel necessary, you have to understand who she was in the spring of 1970. Not who the world believed she was, which was a symbol, a force, a figure that had come to represent something larger than any individual person can comfortably contain. But who she actually was in the ordinary and specific sense. A 27-year-old woman from Port Arthur, Texas, who had been famous for 3 years and was only beginning to understand what that meant. Port Arthur had done its work early and thoroughly. The refinery town on the Gulf Coast where Janis was born on January 19, 1943, was a place that knew how things should be and enforced that knowledge with the particular persistence of communities that have mistaken familiarity for wisdom. She had arrived into that world with qualities that the world around her found difficult, an intensity that could not be moderated, a hunger for expression that the town experienced as excess, an emotional honesty that made the people in rooms with her uncomfortable in the way that people are always uncomfortable when someone feels more than the agreed-upon amount. She read when she was supposed to socialize. She painted when she was supposed to be practical. She said what she thought in rooms where the expectation was quiet compliance. By the time adolescence arrived, Port Arthur had already delivered its verdict. Janis Joplin was too much. The cruelty that followed that verdict was specific and sustained, the mockery, the exclusion, the social machinery of a small town directed at someone it had decided did not belong. What rescued her was music. Bessie Smith first, then Lead Belly, then Big Mama Thornton, artists who had taken the most extreme versions of human feeling and turned them into something that outlasted the feeling itself. Hearing Bessie Smith for the first time was not, for Janis, a discovery. It was a recognition. Someone had felt this much and had transformed it into sound rather than silence. The intensity she had been punished for might not be a flaw. It might be the instrument. She left Port Arthur in stages, at 17, at 19, and then more permanently in 1966 when San Francisco offered what Port Arthur never had, a place where the intensity was not a problem to be corrected but a quality to be used. She found Big Brother and the Holding Company, a band that could receive her voice without flinching, and she found for the first time a community that understood what she was before she had fully articulated it herself. The Monterey Pop Festival in June 1967 changed everything in the permanent, before and after way that only a handful of moments in a life ever do. She walked onto that outdoor stage unknown to most of the 50,000 people in that field and walked off as someone the music industry could no longer ignore. Her performance of Ball and Chain, the completeness of her commitment to it, the note held past the point of technique into something that had no technical name, became one of those performances that people who were present have spent decades trying to describe to people who were not. Cheap Thrills reached #1, Piece of My Heart played everywhere. The machinery of commercial music reorganized itself around her almost overnight, and with it came everything that fame brings and everything that fame withholds. She was seen by millions, she was known by very few. The performances that looked like total freedom were also a form of total exposure, and exposure at that scale extracts something from a person that does not automatically return between shows. She left Big Brother and the holding company. She assembled the Cosmic Blues Band, then the Full Tilt Boogie Band. Each transition was an attempt to find the precise musical context that would let the voice do what it was capable of doing without requiring her to leave more of herself on the stage than she could afford to leave. By 1970, the Pearl sessions were underway, and there was something happening in those recordings that felt different from anything before, more settled, more complete. The quality of a voice that has been through enough to understand what it is carrying and has chosen, with full awareness, to carry it. Anyway, this was who Janis Joplin was when Kris Kristofferson called. A woman in the middle of the most focused and honest work of her career, who had built something in those Pearl sessions that felt like it had cost everything she had, and who was not certain she had anything left to spend on a song that already existed in someone else's version. That was why she said no. And that was why the song, once it had found her, refused to accept the answer. Kris Kristofferson had come to songwriting by a route that made him, in some ways, the last person anyone expected to be handing songs to Janis Joplin. He was a Rhodes Scholar, a former Army Ranger, a man who had given up a faculty position at West Point to move to Nashville and work as a janitor at Columbia recording studios while writing songs that no one was yet willing to record. The gap between his credentials and his circumstances was the kind of gap that people around him found baffling, but Kristofferson had understood something about himself early, that the songs were the thing and that everything else, the scholarship, the military career, the academic appointment, was arrangement around a center that had already been decided. He had written Me and Bobby McGee in 1969. Two people on a road, a journey with no destination, the temporary freedom of having nowhere to be and no one waiting. The verse moved like highway miles, easy, accumulating, the landscape changing without the fundamental situation changing. And then the bridge arrived and the song stopped being a road song. Freedom's just another word for nothing left to lose. Nothing ain't worth nothing, but it's free. Kristofferson had written those lines in the same session as the rest of the song, but they came from somewhere different, from a philosophical understanding of freedom that the road narrative had been building toward without announcing. Freedom, the lines argued, is not the absence of constraint in any simple sense. It is the state that exists when you have given up protecting what you were afraid to lose. It is what happens after the loss, not before it. It is the specific lightness that arrives when there is nothing left to hold on to. Roger Miller had recorded the song and done something genuine with it, but Kristofferson kept hearing a gap between what Miller's version said and what the song was capable of saying. The gap was not about talent. It was about specificity of experience. The line about freedom required a voice that had not merely understood the concept but had lived inside it, had arrived at freedom. Through loss, not through choice, he thought of Janis Joplin, not because she was famous or because recording the song would benefit either of their careers, but because her voice was the only voice he could imagine that had actually been to the place the song was describing, had arrived there through the accumulation of everything she had been through. He called her. She said no. He understood why she said no. He did not accept it. The second conversation happened about 2 weeks after the first. Kristofferson called again, and this time he was more direct. He didn't describe the song, she already knew the song. He described what he believed was possible. He told her that the line at the center of it, freedom's just another word for nothing left to lose, was a line that had been waiting for her specifically, that the experience of Singing it was going to feel like saying something she had been trying to say for a long time in a language that was finally precise enough. Janis listened. There was a long pause after he finished. She asked him if he really believed that or if he was saying it because he wanted her to record the song. He told her both things were true simultaneously and that he didn't think that made either of them less honest. Another pause. Then she said she would think about it. She thought about it for 3 days. The people who were around her during those days describe her as slightly distracted, present in conversations but with some portion of her attention elsewhere, in a place they couldn't follow. She didn't talk about the song directly with anyone, but she listened to Roger Miller's version twice. She listened to other Kristofferson songs. She sat with a guitar on the second day and played through the chord structure without singing, just letting the melody move under her hands. On the third day she called Kristofferson and said yes. She didn't explain why she had changed her mind. He didn't ask what Janis Joplin brought to me and Bobby McGee when she finally recorded it in September 1970 was not an interpretation of the song. It was a collision with it. She came at those lyrics from the inside, not performing their meaning but reporting it, the way you report something you have witnessed rather than something you have studied. And the thing she was reporting, the thing that Kristofferson had heard in her voice before she had agreed to use it, was an understanding of freedom that the song's most important line could not have been written without. Freedom's just another word for nothing left to lose. She had been losing things since Port Arthur. She had lost the belonging she never quite had, and then lost the illusion that belonging was something she should want. She had lost the obscurity that protected her and traded it for a fame that exposed her. She had lost the specific, irreplaceable feeling of performing to small rooms where the transaction between singer and audience was direct and mutual and private, and traded it for the enormous, impersonal transaction of performing to crowds so large that the individual faces disappeared into a single mass of response. She had lost relationships to the pace of a career that did not pause, and she had lost portions of herself to the performance of a freedom that was, in some nights more than others, more symbol than substance. None of those losses had broken her. Each of them had contributed to a clarity. The specific clarity that arrives when you have been through enough that the things you were afraid to lose no longer frighten you. That freedom is not what you have before loss. It is what you discover you still have afterward. This was the understanding she brought to that vocal booth in September 1970. This was what Kristofferson had heard in her voice when she wasn't yet singing the song, had heard as potential in the recordings she had already made, had identified as the specific quality that made her the only possible destination for those particular words. When she sang freedom's just another word for nothing left to lose, it was not a line about a character in a road story. It was a woman reporting from the interior of her own experience, using someone else's words because someone else had found them first and they were exact. The voice on that recording does not sound like someone singing about freedom. It sounds like someone who has arrived there and is describing what it is like from the inside. Paul Rothschild, who was producing the Pearl sessions, was in the control room when she recorded the take. People who were present describe a particular stillness that fell over the room when she hit that line, not the appreciative stillness of people hearing something good, but the different, more serious stillness of people who understand they are witnessing something that cannot be manufactured or repeated or achieved through any amount of technique alone. The kind of stillness that means, this is what it sounds like when a voice and a song are exactly right for each other. When the take ended, Rothschild lined into the intercom and told her it was done. She asked if he was sure. He said he was sure. She stood in the booth for another moment with the headphones still on, which was a habit of hers. She often forgot to take them off after a session, would walk around for 10 minutes wearing them before someone pointed it out and both of them laughed. She didn't laugh this time. She stood in the booth with the headphones on and said nothing for a moment, and the people watching through the glass said later that her expression was the expression of someone who has just finished saying something important and is letting the silence after it exist without rushing to fill it. Then she took the headphones off, walked out of the booth, asked if anyone wanted coffee. The tape was already rewinding. What happened to me and Bobby McGee after Janis Joplin recorded it is one of the stranger stories in the history of American popular music. because the song's largest. Life began after she was no longer alive to witness it. She died on October 4, 1970, at the Landmark Motor Hotel in Los Angeles. She was 27 years old. The Pearl sessions were essentially complete. The album was released the following January and reached #1 on the Billboard charts. Me and Bobby McGee was released as a single in February 1971 and reached #1 as well, giving Janis Joplin her first #1 single 7 weeks after her death. The song then did something that most songs, even great ones, do not do. It continued to expand. It was covered by artists across genres, across decades, across the full range of musical contexts that a song can occupy. Each version found something in it: the road narrative, the freedom argument, the specific weight of the loss that makes freedom possible, and each version confirmed what Kristofferson had known when he wrote it, that the song was resilient enough to carry multiple interpretations without collapsing. But none of the versions that followed have displaced Janis's, not because hers was technically superior to all others. Some of the subsequent recordings are extraordinary on their own terms, but because she did something in that vocal booth in September 1970 that is not replicable by anyone who has not lived inside the same specific combination of loss and survival and hard-won clarity that she brought to those 3 minutes and 47 seconds. She sang freedom's just another word for nothing left to lose, as though she knew what it had cost, because she did. Kris Kristofferson has spoken about his decision to call Janis a second time in various interviews across the decades since. What comes through consistently in those accounts is not self-congratulation, not the satisfaction of someone who proved a point, but something quieter and more complicated. The recognition of someone who understood that he had been right about the destination of the song, but had not fully understood what that rightness would mean once the recording existed and the person who made it no longer did. He has said that hearing the finished recording for the first time after her death was one of the most significant musical experiences of his life. Not because it was his song, he is careful to separate himself from the ownership framing, which he seems to find both inaccurate and slightly beside the point, but because it confirmed something he had believed on insufficient evidence when he made the second phone call: that a voice and a song can find each other across distance, across doubt, across a first refusal, and arrive at something that neither of them could have produced alone. The second phone call, the one he made after she said no. That call and the 3 days she spent thinking about it before she said yes, and the September afternoon in the Sunset Sound vocal booth, and the expression on her face when she stood in the booth after the take ended with the headphones still on, all of it accumulated into 3 minutes and 47 seconds of tape that has been playing somewhere in the world every day since February 1971. A song about freedom, recorded by a woman who had earned the right to sing it. Given to her by a man who heard her voice in it before she heard it herself, and all of it beginning with a phone call she almost didn't answer and a no that almost held. The legacy of me and Bobby McGee is inseparable from the legacy of Janis Joplin herself, and both of them are inseparable from the question Kristofferson's song was built around: what is freedom, and what does it cost, and what do you find on the other side of paying for it? Janis had been answering that question her entire life without knowing a song would eventually ask it precisely enough to become its vessel. From the girl in Port Arthur who felt too much in a place that rewarded feeling less, to the woman in San Francisco who found for the first time a world that could hold what she was, to the performer at Monterey who walked out terrified and came back transformed, to the artist in the Pearl sessions who had finally stopped trying to demonstrate anything and had simply started saying what was true. Every stage of her life had been a movement toward the specific understanding that the central line of Kristofferson's song described. She arrived at the song at exactly the moment she was capable of singing it, not a year earlier when the rawness was still more instinctive than considered, not later because there was no later. In September 1970, in the window between everything she had been through and everything that was still to come, she stood in a booth and sang a song about losing everything and finding freedom on the other side of the loss. And the voice on that recording, which anyone can hear right now, at any moment by pressing play, does not sound like someone performing a philosophical concept. It sounds like someone describing a place they have been, someone who made the journey and came back with a report. The report is 3 minutes and 47 seconds long. It has been traveling through the world since February 1971. It is still traveling. It still arrives. With the same force it carried the first time, because what it contains is not nostalgia and not history, but something that exists outside of time, the sound of a specific human voice in a specific moment telling the truth about what it costs to be free. She said no first, then the song found her anyway. That is, in its own way, exactly what the song was about.